Hello, everybody, and welcome to Business and Bourbon. All right, everybody, welcome back to Business and Bourbon, where I drink bourbon and hopefully explain to you business in an intelligible way. Today, I'm sitting here with Woodford Reserve, one of my favorites. And for those of you who are new to the show, every time I mess up this video, I drink a little bit more bourbon. So the more intoxicated I seem, the more I mess this up, and you know how hard I've worked on this video and how many takes it's taken. Okay, so today I want to talk about three topics: division of labor, value-added activity, and how that applies to your small business that you're trying to grow. The conversation really came from a group chat I was having with some people, one of which was an engineer, typical engineer, very smart, brilliant, had a wonderful product, had no idea how to sell it. There was an artist there who had said the line, make something that's consumable, as in that's how you sell something, make it consumable. And obviously the problem with that is you can make a lot of things that are technically consumable that nobody wants to consume. Think about if you simply have a burger that doesn't taste good. It is technically consumable. You're not going to get anyone to eat it. So, how do you sell something then? How do you grow a business and get it out there? Well, instead of thinking I want to make something consumable, I told him find a way to add value. So how do you add value is one of the things we're going to get into today. But in order to understand that, you first have to understand the true meaning of division of labor. And it's something that most people get on a general sense, like they know that when you divide labor, something good happens. They don't really understand why. So I'm going to explain that. I'm going to need my hands for this. Okay, so say you and I both own a company where we're making cups, paper cups, work for Starbucks or whatever coffee shop, right? Those little paper cups with a lid. Say it takes you 1 hour to make a lid, but 2 hours to make the actual cup. So now you've got 3 hours for a cup. On the flip side, I'm going to be the exact opposite. 2 hours to make a lid, and then 1 hour to make that cup portion. And this is an oversimplified version. Obviously, I'm rounding to an hour. I'm assuming that there's this perfect little number here. A lot of factors into play. A lot of it, let's just say that these are natural inclinations. Something about your hands are more dexterous for cups, mine are more dexterous for lids. Whole lot of reasons why that can be that I don't want to get into with this video. Just know that there's a lot that goes into just that. But right now, you take an hour for lids and 2 hours for cups. I take 2 hours for lids, 1 hour for cups. So that means in a total of 3 hours, we have combined produced one whole cup each, right? Now, what if we focus on our strengths? So you can make a lid in 1 hour, and I can make a cup in 1 hour. So if you only make lids, it'll now take you 2 hours to make 2 lids, and it'll take me 2 hours to make 2 cups. So we've now spent 2 hours each rather than 3 hours, and each made the same amount of cups. So we've each made a cup, like we did in the first example, but focusing on our strengths, we saved an hour. If you want to turn that around, we can also say that we can make an extra cup, right? And that's probably an easier way to think of value added, so we can make that extra value. So you can make, in that same 3 hours you spent in the first example, you can now make 3 lids. And then I can make 3 cups. So in 3 hours, like the original example, we've now made 3 cups combined instead of 2. So it's straight up math. Obviously, like I said, there's a lot of differences in the time. Sometimes it's down to a second that you're different. Sometimes it's upon hours. All kinds of factors. But I want you to notice that the numbers I'm doing is 1 to 2. Say we have something that it takes me an hour to make a product, like it takes me an hour to make an axle, but it takes me 10 hours to make a wheel, and that happens all the time. Some people have a better infrastructure, a better know-how, and a specialty in those fields. And then that person who can make a wheel, amazingly, may take 2 hours to make the axle. well, I can still make that faster than him. So it's still value added, or still creating an extra time, essentially, if I'm doing it versus him. And that's really what we talk about when we think of creating wealth, right? So back to the cup example, you either have wealth in time or wealth in product now. Either way, by division of labor, we have created either an extra hour for each of us, or we've created an extra cup. So that is how you create wealth. And that's a very large part of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. If you haven't read it, I don't suggest it. It's a very dense book, but if you are glutton for punishment, go ahead and try. Okay, so now we have division of labor and how that creates wealth. Now there's other things that go into that. Specialties is a big thing. So say you've got that square peg, square hole. You're doing two things. The speed in which you learn increases the simpler the task gets. So if I'm making a cup, right now, initially it takes me 3 hours to make a cup. After doing this for a year, it'll then take me 2.5 hours, right? But if I'm only making lids, I will get faster at that at an accelerated pace. So my acceleration of time will increase faster at a faster rate than it would be with the more complex version. If you're doing square peg, square hole, that's a lot easier to become faster than building an entire car. Even though, I mean, there's uses to building an entire car, don't get me wrong. If you know how to build a whole car, great. But the speed in which you will get faster at building a car is slower than the speed in which you'll get faster at building a axle. Hopefully that made sense. If that part doesn't, a lot of people get stuck on that. Leave a comment. I'll go more into that particular thing. And then you also have essentially specialty in knowledge, where think of a doctor. It took a doctor, 8 years, right, to get a doctorate degree, sometimes 10 years to get a doctorate to understand how to perform surgery. So for me to perform one surgery is going to take 8 years and 1 day. It takes that doctor 1 day. There's a wonderful story about, I think it was Picasso. I'm not an artist, so if I get the story wrong, don't hate me. But Picasso comes out, is walking down the street, and this lady says, "Hey, you're the fancy artist. Can you draw me?" And he says, "Sure." It takes him 5 seconds, draws a sketch over, throws it to her, and says, "That'll be $1,000. So of course she's like, "What? That took you 5 seconds? How could that possibly be valued at $1,000? Because of course they spoke like that back then. And he says, "No, that didn't take me 30 seconds. That took me 30 years to learn how to do." Right? So for me to draw that one thing would take me 30 years to get to his level, whereas for him, he's already there, so he can do it in 30 seconds. So it's not about that little snippet of time that he adds value. It's saving the entire production capabilities. So take that back to a manufacturing facility. The amount of money it would take me to build a cup sleeve, right? Those little things that go around the cup to keep it warm. I don't have any infrastructure for that. I don't have any source material for that. I don't have any retail buyers for that, something along those lines. There's a whole lot of things there, a whole lot of infrastructure and overhead I don't have. So for me to be able to make a batch of sleeves is a huge investment. But if there's a company that already makes those, not that much. It may take them an hour. So that's where you break things down. Okay, so that transitions us into value-added activity, which is, okay, so how do you create value for someone? And this is my argument against the idea that you make something to be consumable. You make something that adds value. Okay, so if you have a paper cup company, right? So we're back to the cup thing. If you're making cups, we'll say we're done with the lids. Right now we're just focused on cups. So you're making cups. Well, where are you getting your plastic? Are you making your own plastic? Are you paying for that plastic to be delivered to your warehouse or your manufacturing facility? Are you doing all of the construction there? Are you creating the glue and all those parts? Are you delivering that to your retail customers? Are you actually dealing with the sales on site of the cafe that's using your cups? All of those things are different activities that you have to do in order to create and sell a cup. Now, division of labor, as we've noticed, we'll talk about breaking that down to one person makes the plastic, one person assembles the plastic into a cup, and then one person sells the cup to the customer, and then you have transportation and distribution. all through there. All of those things, you have an entire company based around that one principle of dividing that labor up and the people focusing on it. Because a company that focuses on distribution is going to be able to distribute those cups at a much faster rate than a manufacturing warehouse will. Once again, hopefully that makes sense. If that didn't, leave a comment below and I will clarify on that some more. Okay, so let's turn this around. So that's how people add value to you, is by taking those responsibilities off your hands. And really the trick is, what can they do better or faster than you can, right? So one of the big questions that I'll get to here in a minute is, how do you decide when to outsource? And that has everything to do with this division of labor. But let's first focus on, if this is your company, you're the salesperson now, right? We've already talked about what people can do for you, but now you're the salesperson. What value can you add? Well, we've already talked about the ability to division of labor. Well, what does that mean? What are you dividing up? Well, that changes from business to business or customer to customer. And do not underestimate or overlook the fact that a company can be your customer even if they're selling that forward. If I'm selling a plastic to a cup company, and then they're selling that cup to a Starbucks, and then that Starbucks is selling it to the end user, great. That end user is a lot of focus. We got to pay attention to the person who's actually using that cup. But for me, if I'm the plastic company, my customer is you, who owns the cup manufacturing facility. You're my customer, not the person drinking the Starbucks cup, you. So how do I serve your needs? Now, typically with business to business, and this is complete just generalizations, don't take this as set in stone or truths to live by. But generally for business, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to decrease the price, because if you can make it faster, you can spend less money on labor, on overhead with electric costs and all those things. Or if you can make it cheaper by, paying your labor less, like a manufacturing warehouse in China, those kind of things. That's why we have people outsourcing to those countries, because they can do it at cheaper labor. But that's the first thing. Second thing is usually quality. And then the third is usually ease of use. Now that can be ease of use of your product, or also just working with you, because a lot of times the deciding factor about whether or not to work with a company is how easy that company and those people are to work with. So if you've got a salesman on the front line who's, smart and intelligent and, all this stuff, but he rubs people the wrong way, people are going to work with you just because him. They don't want to work with someone who rubs them the wrong way. Or if your website is clunky and all that stuff, that's value. The ease of use of value. That headache is value. So sometimes you can steal a customer from a rival simply by having a better website that's a little bit easier to use. Things matter. If you're selling straight to a customer, though, straight to an end user, so the person drinking the coffee out of the cup, price is still first. Price is nearly always first. But you also have things like prestige that come into play. Think of how many people have an iPod or a iPhone. Who has an iPod anymore? Who has an iPhone, who has a Columbia sportswear jacket, who has all of these name brand things, even though there's no extra utility. They don't really care about how good the camera actually is, because all cameras are great. They just trust the iPhone, right? For the record, I have a Google Pixel, much better phone. Anyways, but then also, so along with prestige is brand. Now, brand encompasses a lot more than people tend to think, because brand also brings in reliability. I will trust Google phones, I will trust Amazon phones. Honestly, I'll trust most Samsung phones. They're kind of a gray area because they exploded there for a couple of years. But if you get, I guess LG is still okay, but if you get like a ZAG phone or some phone that you can't pronounce the name, the main problem with that is you're like, well, what if it breaks? Is it going to break, first of all? Is it going to break? Is it going to be crappy? Is it going to work? And if it does break, am I going to have the customer support? All of these issues come into play. So that's the brand trust, I think, is what really comes in. So these are all different ways to create value, and there's millions more. You're never going to run out of ways to create value. So that brings us to the question of, when do you outsource? Right? So we know how to create wealth, division of labor. We know how to add value to someone by being that dividing labor. They can break them, I can tell you, I can do this part cheaper for you, so you can save money by paying me to do it instead. Well, it's easy to say outsourcing is always cheaper, but it's not. Because keep in mind, the person you're outsourcing to also has profit. So if you can make something at the same cost that they can, but they're getting a profit as well, then you're shooting yourself in the foot. If they can make something cheap enough that even with their profit, their unit price is lower than what you can make it, that may make sense. There's a lot of reasons why someone can do that. The biggest one is overhead. If someone has a better infrastructure and lower overhead cost, they can probably make something at a better unit price than you, and you'd want to outsource. So sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. I think one of the multiple reasons for that is identifying when you can't do something as good or cheap as they can. So let's take Apple, for example, right? Apple got a lot of crap for outsourcing to Chinese companies, all this stuff. Well, okay, I'm not going to debate that, but let's look at why they did it. Apple outsourced that because they focus on, they buy their microprocessors because that's not something they can do. They get that from Intel. So they take their microprocessors and put it into this greater design of a computer. Now their computers, they don't really make, they design and they assemble, but then they separate everything else because they do not have the manufacturing facility to create a steel frame as cheaply as someone in China or honestly probably even like Illinois or something like that, because they just don't have that kind of manufacturing facility. So they'll outsource that because those people can do those parts cheaper, and they send all those to Apple, and then Apple just assembles them, and then their main value is the intellectual property of how to create this whole thing, how to design and then assemble this computer in a way to sell, and then of course their brand awareness and all that stuff is great value too. So that's it works for them in that way, but it doesn't always work to outsource. In fact, there are a lot of companies who begin outsourcing, and then after a while, when they're big enough, they will do what's called vertical integration. So, good example of that is Starbucks. Starbucks obviously is a coffee retail. They sell a lot of other things. They sell things like Tazo tea. Not everyone knows that they bought Tazo tea, so they own that company. So they're now making coffee and tea rather than selling someone else's tea. Maybe that's not that lucrative for you, but in the coffee industry, most of the time, these cafes will buy from coffee growers, right? Most coffee shops do not grow their own coffee, especially mom and pop shops. They can't. So you have a coffee grower, and that's usually in, Guatemala, Puerto Rico. If you didn't know all these countries of coffee, that's where they're actually grown. So Sumatra is actually a place in Indonesia. Java State is places in Indonesia, they're islands. So most of the time, those people grow the crops. They'll hire rather than buy from necessarily. They'll commission distribution centers to send it to America or whatever country you're in, and then places like Starbucks will roast it and then serve it. Some places don't even roast it. Some places, like here I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, there's a place called Quill's Coffee that will roast their coffee and then sell that to a coffee shop. So you now have a grower, distributor, roaster, and then a cafe, and that's like the bare bones. There's all kinds of other stuff that can be added in there. Well, Starbucks, who's a coffee shop, decided they want to roast their coffee too. They have, I think, 3 roasteries now, something like that. I may be wrong. So they're now roasting their coffee. Well, that's not quite good enough. We also want to grow the coffee, either because they think they have the infrastructure to do it cheaper, or maybe they want quality control. They don't trust what some of these other people are growing, so they want to just grow it themselves. That way they're not having to verify, right? So they could either spend a lot of money in quality checks, what they buy, or they can grow it themselves and do the quality cheaper. They found that for their company, they can do it cheaper by growing it themselves. So the only thing left in that chain is distribution. And honestly, I don't know if they have their own distribution. I doubt it. But, that's international shipping, cargo freights, and all that stuff done. So that's called vertical integration because they found it's more valuable for them, or that they can grow enough to make every step of their value chain. That's what it's called when you're adding value. All these steps are called your value chain. They can do their entire value chain cheaper than a competitor could because they're large enough that their division of labor can still fall under their one company, right? So in a manufacturing facility, you would have one person create a rubber tire, the other person assemble the rubber tire, so that, you know, two employees of the same company sitting next to each other. Starbucks just has two companies of the same conglomerate working next to each other because they're that large where they can do that. And they do that, GE does that, a lot of companies do vertical integration. Okay, so you as a small business owner, is typically who I'm talking to here. I hope now you can understand first why division of labor is good, because that can help you understand when to hire someone. Also understand how to create value, both in the sense of how someone can create value for you, so outsourcing, and also how you can create value to your customer. Because that's really, really what you want to focus on when you're selling to them or when you're developing your product. You want to figure out who your customer is, what they need, what you can do better than them, and then make that or do that thing and sell it to them. Because most of the time, if I'm spending $5 for a cup and you can make it for $2, I'm going to spend $3 to buy that cup from you. So you get $1 profit, I save $2. Okay? And that's my speech today. Thank you for staying the whole time, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.